Yuji and Todo begin to enter into the subway, however they are not the only two that are entering into the subway, as we return back to the other squadron, that being Megumi, Kamo, Nobara, Nanami, Naobito, as well as Maki. But not all of them were going to enter into the subway as well. After all, both Megumi and Kamo were still feeling relatively damaged from both of their battles. Megumi was still feeling very damaged from having to use his domain to clash against Dagon, as well as having to fight Toji. Even though he didn't take anywhere near as much damage as he would have in canon, he still was feeling relatively tired. Kamo, on the other hand, was feeling tired from all of the hits that he had to take from Toji up to this point. And there was finally Maki, who, while Maki only took a kick from Dagon, she had to acknowledge the fact that she would not be of much help and be more of a burden to everybody else in the subway, mainly because of everything that she had heard up to this point. After all, in the battle against Dagon, she was completely useless, and now they were going to go up against Mahito, who from what Maki had heard was even stronger than Jogo, who Jogo was on a completely different level from Dagon. And this led to Maki feeling like she was a weakling, that she could barely help. She was going to need to get more weapons from the Zenin clan and find some way to get stronger, because she absolutely hated this. She felt like she stagnated. Meanwhile, all three of her lower classmen have surpassed her, as well as the person from Kyoto High. She couldn't accept this. This left the group of Naobito, Nobara, and Nanami going down. Of course, Nanami was also contemplating if he should have left and gotten healed himself, but he still felt there was more than he could do. He still felt he had enough stamina in the tank. But Nanami was primarily going down to help protect Nobara. Nobara was going to be their key to beating Mahito if they encountered him. After all, Nobara was probably one of the only few people that they knew could actually hit Mahito. Naobito was also there and present to help get the nails onto the opponents, just in case, thanks to Naobito's massive speed advantage he had on most opponents. They just hoped they could reunite with Yuji and Todo before finding Mahito. After all, they were at risk of dealing with Mahito's domain, but if they could find Yuji, they wouldn't have to deal with that. So they were now entering into the subway with a total of 2 goals. The first goal was to free Gojo, and the second goal was to kill Mahito, and they were on a bit of a clock to do so. Now, due to a battle between Mahoraga and Sukuna never happening, they actually did have a little bit more time in comparison to normal to find Gojo. However, Mahito did have a little bit more of a plan. Mahito was currently sitting inside of the security camera booth, as he was using the security cameras in order to watch everything that was happening. He got this idea from a video game that he played while he was bored named Five Nights at Freddy's, and he felt that this was a pretty fun idea. And while Mahito had grown a lot, he actually kept a lot of his power secret from Kenjaku and the others. As Mahito was already pretty close to reaching the point where he was evolved enough for Kenjaku to absorb him, but Mahito had been hiding his strength, mainly because he had no idea what Kenjaku truly wanted, and he never really trusted him to begin with. Plus, Mahito figured something else thanks to his battle with Yuji, and he was very excited to test it against him. As Mahito released 2 transfigured humans through polymorphic soul isomer while getting up himself. The first one was very heavily based on the design of a finger bearer. However, it was a little bit more armored, as this was the combination of 30 human souls, but there was one more soul to it that was rather unique. This was the soul of a sorcerer. This would allow this transfigured human to reinforce its body with curse energy, as it was sent out to go fight Nobara, Nanami, and Naobito. Meanwhile, the other transfigured human was also a humanoid type of transfigured human, which was red. One that was towering over Mahito that also had a very unique trait about them. They had a total of 6 arms as well as eyeballs all across their body. As now they were going to go after both Yuji and Todo. While Yuji and Todo were walking through the subway, Yuji's body shook a little bit. After all, while Yuji did consume the fingers and thought that he had reached his limit, Sukuna was still able to somewhat fight against him currently. His body hadn't fully finished adjusting yet. As Todo looked over to Yuji, worried for a moment, but he knew it would be fine. After all, it would just take Yuji a bit more time in order for him to fully adjust. Plus, Todo would be here to help him no matter what. Yuji was still pretty strong right now and still winning the fight against Sukuna on the inside. It was just he had a little bit more resistance that he was actually expecting. However, suddenly both Yuji and Todo heard something odd, as they heard a wall collapse, and another, but more importantly, that sound was getting closer and closer to them. Before suddenly the two of them see a massive fist be flown right through the wall. As Yuji and Todo, thanks to the sounds, were able to narrowly avoid that fist. However, out from that arm, Mahito rose out and rushed at Todo, but he didn't go for a grab on Todo. No, he robbed something of Todo. However, he went out of his way to make it look like he was attempting to go for grabbing Todo and just missing, mainly because he did not want to clue them in on what he went for and what he took. Though he also knew it would only be a matter of time until Todo realized, which is why he knew he needed to keep them distracted. As several more hands from the transfigured human went for Todo, with the transfigured human deciding to fight Todo in a one-on-one matchup. The transfigured human also choosing to enter into the room, while at the same time Mahito went for Yuji. As Mahito couldn't help but ask if Yuji liked the design of the transfigured human. He made it specifically to counter Todo. After hearing how Hanami battled against Todo, he realized in that moment that he really needed to find a specific counter towards that curse technique, which led to the creation of this transfigured human right over here. At the same time, he also didn't want anyone to interrupt their little 1v1, especially because Mahito had something he very much wanted to show Yuji. At the same time though, Yuji activated Flowing Red Scale and Flowing Red Scale Stack, as a rage entered into Yuji. The specific person that Yuji wanted to kill most of all was now here, Mahito. And in a way, Yuji was also kind of happy that it was going to be a one-on-one between himself and Mahito. This would mean no one has a chance to get hurt, but most of all that he'd finally be able to put Mahito down once and for all. But he already could tell that Mahito was going to be a harder fight than Jogo would have been. Now, Yuji did feel that he was capable of beating Jogo in a one-on-one fight if it wasn't for Jogo's domain expansion normally, but he would have taken quite a bit of damage if he did try and fight Jogo one-on-one. Thankfully, he did have an entire team of people with him just to make sure that he didn't get that hurt. In fact, the battle had gone so well, Yuji hadn't gotten hit once by Jogo. And while Yuji still did feel a little bit stronger because he consumed Sukuna's fingers, he knew that taking on Mahito alone was going to be a hard task for anybody, especially because he was now completely alone, as Yuji was the one to make the first move, with him closing the distance immediately between the two of them and attempting to land a punch on his chest. In Flowing Red Scale Stack, Yuji's speed was immense, as he already had amazing physical speed in his normal state, and now that was being amplified by Flowing Red Scale Stack. However, Mahito just on time was able to catch the blow, which that ended up surprising Yuji. Even if Mahito got much stronger, so did Yuji. There was no way Mahito was able to get that fast until Mahito began to explain something else. You know, both of our curse techniques are rather similar. With yours, you're able to manipulate the blood within your body, and use that to make constructs. With mine, I'm able to manipulate my soul, and thus my body follows forth. Before Mahito went for the offense, attempting to punch Yuji in the face, but Yuji was able to redirect the punch, as the two began to enter into a clash of fists, but while they were entering into a clash of fists, Mahito continued to explain. So that got me thinking, is there anything I can do that is like you in order to close the distance in our physical bodies? So I did research on your techniques. Most of the techniques there was no way I could pull off. While I could shape my soul, I couldn't really manipulate it outside of my body in the same way you guys can do blood manipulation, so that was a no-go. But there was one technique I could do. In order to utilize Flowing Red Scale, one must increase their heartbeat, increase the amount of red blood cells in the body, as well as increase the temperature, resulting in a much greater physical amp, as well as re-energizing the user. However, since this technique was completely internal, it was easy for me to mimic, as Mahito went in for a kick on Yuji's face, which Yuji was able to catch and threw Mahito to the side, with wings growing out of Mahito's back as they flapped in order to stop his momentum, or at least slow it down a bit. Mahito called this technique False Red Scale. Furthermore, now that he had explained it properly to Yuji, he ended up getting an amp towards this technique as well, the revealing one's hand binding vow. Before Mahito explained that he had one more trick he wanted to show Yuji, but that would wait for now. After all, that was something that he didn't really want to use unless absolutely necessary. But Yuji accepted this challenge as he opened up both of his hands, resulting in two slicing exorcisms forming that were both shaped like discs. At the same time, Mahito lifted up his own hands, while out from his back, two compressed polymorphic soul isomers were launched out before shapeshifting, both of them taking on rather humanoid-like appearances. After all, Mahito knew Yuji did not like fighting humans, so he was going to take advantage of that. As the battle between the two began, Yuji making the first move, throwing both the slicing exorcisms at Mahito. However, one of the transfigured humans jumped in front of it in order to take the blow. Mahito told the other transfigured human jumped past the one that got killed by Yuji's attack, Mahito going for a punch on Yuji's head, while the transfigured human went for a kick on his chest. Yuji used one hand in order to deflect Mahito's strike, while using his other hand to create a blood spike and throw it right for the transfigured human's head, launching them back, as Mahito opened his mouth, launching out a large transfigured human towards Yuji in the shape of a serpent. It opened its mouth, revealing several teeth, as Yuji lifted up both of his hands in order to stop its momentum head-on. However, to surprise Yuji, Mahito rose out from the mouth of the serpent, with his hand shaped into a sharp point, as he was about to attempt to stab it into Yuji's head, but Yuji was quick to react as he turned his head slightly, resulting in the blood shard he threw at the transfigured human flying past his head and colliding with Mahito's attack. This all happened before the corpse of the transfigured human fell to the ground. Both Yuji and Mahito landed on the ground, making a distance from each other, before Mahito then turned both of his hands into spike balls and rushed at Yuji. While he was rushing at him, he opened his mouth and spat out two more transfigured humans that were really small, but then he had them shapeshift and they took on their original human forms. This made Yuji blink as he was caught off guard by this, and of course his natural instinct was to attempt to try and catch them. This was exactly what Mahito had wanted. As Yuji moved towards them, almost forgetting about Mahito turning his hands into spiked balls, Mahito hit right through both of the humans, attempting to slam both of them on Yuji's head. And while Mahito did pull off using Flowing Red Scale, he didn't pull off Flowing Red Scale Stack. A trait it had was an increased reaction time on top of physical speed, so Yuji was able to see this coming and lifted up both of his hands. Suddenly his hands turned more of a dark red in color, as he activated Blood Armor and caught both of the spiked balls. Then Yuji took advantage of this chance and kicked Mahito in the chest before following that up with a punch to the face after pushing Mahito's hands away. Yuji decided now was the time to try and push his offensive advantage, as Curse Energy surrounded his fist while he glared at Mahito. The strategy that Mahito had just attempted was extremely risky. After all, while this did succeed in catching Yuji off guard, it also made Yuji even more angry than he already was at Mahito. This resulted in the Curse Energy flaring around Yuji's fist getting even more potent. Yuji was funneling that rage into Curse Energy and doing it extremely efficiently, before Yuji began to hit Mahito with a combo, landing a right hook on his face to start. He then went for a punch on Mahito's chest, as he also internally apologized to all of the humans that had suffered from Mahito. He apologized to Junpei as well. After all, even now Yuji felt responsible. If he put Mahito down when they first fought, then none of this would have happened. No more people would have had to suffer from Mahito, but right now that didn't matter. He was going to take down Mahito even if it killed him. As his hands began to turn darker once more, turning into a darker shade of red. Now he was using Blood Armor to amp his offensive capabilities rather than his defensive capabilities. While Blood Armor wasn't anywhere near as good of an amp as Flowing Red Scale Burst, he wanted to save that for the finishing part of this combo. After all, Flowing Red Scale Burst would stop Yuji for a couple seconds, which he knew. This led Yuji into his barrage, as he landed blow after blow on Mahito, but Mahito began to have his own counter-attack, as out from Mahito's body, several spikes from transfigured humans he was carrying on and rose out to try and stab Yuji. But Yuji was able to jump back just on time in order to move out the way of the transfigured human spikes. This led into Mahito's next plan, as both of his arms began to shapeshift into gun-like shapes. Out from both of them, transfigured humans began to fire like bullets towards Yuji. Yuji was able to avoid the transfigured human bullets, using one of the holes that Mahito had made on his entrance to move out the way. This caused a smirk to rise on Mahito as he snapped his fingers, and the moment that Yuji landed, a fist came out from the ground and uppercutted Yuji hard. Mahito had set up some transfigured humans to act as traps, as Mahito rushed towards Yuji while turning his fist to something more like a battering ram, in an attempt to strike Yuji's side. And while the strike did land, it barely knocked Yuji back, as Yuji smirked a bit, activating Blood Armor on his body in order to defend himself, before the sound began. The sound Mahito had been warned about, the sound of the increased heartbeat, as Curse Energy also surrounded Yuji's fist. He was going to attempt to use both of these moves at the same time once more. He was going to try and use the Black Flash and Flowing Red Scale Burst together. Something he was capable of pulling off against Hanami, but he wasn't capable of pulling off against Jogo in their battle, as he landed a strike right in the gut, taking advantage of Mahito being caught off guard. However, while he did land a Flowing Red Scale Burst, he did not pull off the Black Flash, but this was because of Mahito being able to defend themselves by sending out a transfigured human to be used as a shield. Even though Mahito was caught off guard, he was fast enough to be able to adapt. This resulted in the process of the Black Flash being interrupted. However, even with that, the transfigured human was torn through and Mahito was sent flying. Yuji was going to need more of an opening in order to properly land a Black Flash on Mahito. This made Mahito a little bit more confident. After all, he knew he could at least prevent the Black Flashes somewhat. The Flowing Red Scale Burst hit hard, quite a bit, but it wasn't anything as bad in comparison to the others. It was something he could definitely survive. So he believed he would be able to manage, as he quickly hopped out from the ground before seeing Yuji fly at him already, as out from Mahito's back, two large transfigured humans shaped like snakes flew out. Yuji then jumped back, doing a flip in order to avoid both of the transfigured humans, which resulted in a crater forming on the ground from the impact. And the moment the transfigured humans landed on the ground, Yuji clapped his hands together and fired a piercing blood right at Mahito. The two transfigured humans barely moved on time in order to shield Mahito from the piercing blood, giving Mahito just enough time in order to move out the way. However, Yuji saw an opening and he decided to take it, as he closed the distance between the two of them. Mahito, though, was prepared, as this time he was going to meet Yuji head-on, as he focused Curse Energy towards his fist, with Yuji's heartbeat increasing once more to activate Flowing Red Scale Burst. Around Mahito's fist, a transfigured human curved in order to be similar to a battering ram. He was doing this so he would have a good chance at matching Yuji in this clash. As the two fists clashed, both Mahito and Yuji used a Black Flash at the same time, the impact causing a large chunk of the station to be destroyed from a shockwave as Yuji and Mahito were sent flying away from each other, The shockwave of the two black flashes could be felt all throughout the station and even past that, as Kenjaku in the distance was observing this, mainly using his sensory in order to sense the fight, realizing in that moment he very heavily underestimated Mahito, or more accurately that Mahito hid a lot from him. As he had to admit, he was very impressed, and now very intrigued to see how the rest of this battle would go. From Yuji and Mahito's clash, the moonlight entered into the subway. It was strong enough to destroy the ceiling completely, as now both Yuji and Mahito were operating at 120% of their potential. Mahito smiled a bit as well, as he realized that he had underestimated Yuji a bit, as Mahito said, "I think we are done warming up now, so let's truly begin." With Mahito repairing his arm as well, mainly because as a result of the Black Flash, his arm was actually completely destroyed by Yuji's attack. Yuji, on the other hand, was clutching his heart with one arm and felt the pain in his arm in the other, as he panted a bit, until his heart was repaired, but his arm wasn't repaired. It was still damaged as he began to focus on that feeling. He was trying to focus on that feeling of using what he now knew as reverse curse technique and replicate it. He wanted to see if he could pull that off and pull off healing his arm. But he did have a little bit of an advantage, as blood began to spread through his arm in order to find the injured parts that he needed to heal, as steam came off his body and he healed his injured arm. Now, he wasn't too fast with RCT yet. It was still going to take some time and it wasn't applicable in combat, but with practice he would be able to make it applicable. But now Yuji had figured out how to use reverse curse technique. However, once Yuji did look into the distance, he saw something odd, as Mahito revealed what he was talking about earlier, the ability he didn't feel like showing off before, as Mahito's body began to expand, being surrounded by flesh, before it all began to compress down. Mahito had now entered into his instant spirit body of distorted killing form. After battling against Yuji, he knew he wasn't immortal anymore. Yuji could hurt him and kill him. He almost did kill him, so he created this form specifically to battle against people like Yuji. Heavy durability and physical power. In exchange, he couldn't change the shape of his soul to avoid damage in this form. However, with how durable he was, he doubted he could actually get hurt by anybody. Furthermore, he still also had access to False Flowing Red Scale, which he was using. And in this form, Mahito had access to a total of 4 arms, with 2 large armored flesh serpents connected to his body. As now the battle was entering into its second round between Yuji and Mahito. Now how this battle is going to go, find out on the next episode of What If Yuji Got Blood Manipulation Early, as well as what's happening with Toto and the Transfigured Human and Nobara's group against their Transfigured